There is a famous piece of financial advice that has been repeated so many times it has almost become a cliché. It is the idea that the first $100,000 is the hardest money you will ever make, and after that, the math takes over and wealth building becomes effortless. Mathematically, this is absolutely true. The power of compounding interest at $100,000 is a beautiful thing to witness. But psychologically, this advice is deeply flawed. For someone sitting at zero or someone drowning in consumer debt, telling them to focus on $100,000 is like telling someone who is drowning to focus on building a boat. It is too far away. It is too abstract, and most dangerously, it completely ignores the actual turning point in human financial psychology. The most profound shift in your life does not happen at $100,000. The most intense, life-altering change happens the moment you successfully save your first $20,000. To understand why this specific number is so powerful, we have to look at how money, or the lack of it, physically alters our biology. When you have zero savings, you are operating in a state of chronic scarcity. And scarcity is not just a math problem, it is a biological condition. When your bank account is empty, your brain perceives every minor inconvenience as a literal threat to your survival. If your car makes a strange noise, your heart rate spikes. If your boss calls you into the office unexpectedly, your stomach drops. A flat tire, a broken refrigerator, or a minor medical bill is no longer just an annoyance, it is a full-blown crisis that threatens your ability to pay rent and put food on the table. Living like this keeps your nervous system in a constant state of fight or flight. Your cortisol levels are permanently elevated. You cannot think about the future because your brain is entirely consumed with surviving the present week. This is the hidden cost of living paycheck to paycheck. It steals your cognitive bandwidth. But then, something fascinating happens. Through extreme discipline, budgeting, and perhaps taking on extra work, you manage to pile up a barrier between yourself and the edge of the cliff. You hit $20,000 in liquid cash. For the average person in the modern economy, $20,000 represents roughly 4 to 6 months of basic living expenses. It is not retire to a private island money. It is not even buy a luxury car money. But it is something far more powerful. It is no thank you money. The moment that $20,000 sits securely in a high-yield savings account, your biological response to the world fundamentally changes. The scarcity mindset begins to evaporate, and the nervous system finally powers down from its state of high alert. If the car breaks down now, it is no longer a crisis. It is simply a Tuesday. You write a check, the car is fixed, and your life continues without a single missed heartbeat. The problem is reduced from a life-threatening emergency to a minor administrative task. But the changes go far deeper than just handling emergencies. Having a $20,000 wall behind you and absolute zero changes how you interact with other human beings. It completely alters the power dynamics of your life. When you have nothing in the bank, you are incredibly vulnerable to exploitation. If your employer treats you poorly, demands unreasonable hours, or creates a toxic environment, you have to simply sit there and take it. You are trapped because your next paycheck is your oxygen. When you have 6 months of living expenses saved, the dynamic flips. You suddenly have leverage. You realize that if things get entirely out of hand, you can stand up, pack your desk, and walk out the front door without risking your family's shelter. You might not actually quit, but simply knowing that you can changes how you carry yourself. You speak with more confidence, you negotiate better pay, you set boundaries. Interestingly, people who reach this financial milestone often find themselves becoming more successful at their jobs, precisely because they are no longer operating out of desperation. Beyond the psychological piece, hitting this milestone also fundamentally changes the mathematics of your daily life. It ends your participation in the poor tax. The poor tax is the invisible penalty society charges people who do not have cash. When you have no savings, you are forced to finance everything at terrible interest rates. You pay monthly premiums for insurance instead of paying annually, which costs more. You buy cheap, low-quality shoes that wear out in 3 months because you cannot afford the $200 pair that will last for 10 years. You pay overdraft fees, late fees, and minimum payment charges. But with $20,000 behind you, the poor tax vanishes. You can buy household items in bulk when they go on sale. You can pay your auto insurance in a single yearly lump sum for a 15% discount. You can afford to wait for the right deal instead of being forced into a bad one out of urgency. Having money actually makes it cheaper to live. But the final and most profound change that happens after your first $20,000 is the expansion of your time horizon. When you are broke, your time horizon is Friday. You're only thinking about surviving until payday. You cannot plan for next year because next week is not even guaranteed. But when you secure 6 months of financial oxygen, your brain is finally allowed to look up from the ground. You start thinking about years instead of days. You start considering investments. You start thinking about long-term health, learning new high-income skills, and building generational wealth. You shift from playing defense to playing offense. The journey from $0 to $20,000 is a brutal uphill climb. It requires saying no to things you want, ignoring the flashy lifestyles of people around you, and fighting against every consumer instinct society tries to force upon you. But the reward is not just a number on a screen. The reward is your autonomy. The reward is a quiet, profound peace of mind that a luxury car or a designer watch could never possibly provide. If you're on that climb right now, keep going. Don't look at the $100,000 mountain peak and feel discouraged. Focus entirely on building that first layer of armor. Once you do, the entire game of life changes in your favor. If this perspective helped you see your financial journey differently, consider subscribing to Bruce Invests. We explore the deep connection between your money and your mind every week. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.